Hey, welcome to the Professor of Perseverance. I'm Dr. James Purdue, the Professor of Perseverance himself. Thank you for showing up on the podcast here. And anyone that comes in later for the replay, thank you for the replay coming in and listening. Hey, have we got someone for you today? You know, our topic here is we want to talk about overcoming adversities. I mean, we want to kick the teeth in of adversity, challenges, difficulties, hardships, and we have a story today. And so, not that the others hadn't been good stories, but we got one that we're going to this is something that rarity this happens to. Not everybody's going to experience this here. So let me go ahead and read the introductions as we get started here. And Captain Charlie Plumb has lived what he believes to be the American dream. As a farm kid from Kansas, he fantasized about airplanes. Although he felt certain he would never have the opportunity to pilot one, it would be the United States Naval who afford Plumb the opportunity to live out his dream. After graduating from the Naval Academy, Plumb completed naval flight training and reported to Miramar Navy Air Station in California. Captain Plumb flew 74 successful combat missions over North Vietnam and made over 100 carrier landings. On his 75th mission, just 5 days before the end of his tour, he was shot down, taken prisoner, tortured, and spent the next 2,103 days in an 8-by-8-foot cell as prisoner of war. During his nearly 6 years of captivity, Plumb distinguished himself as a pro in underground communications. He was a great inspiration to all his POWs, served as a chaplain for 2 years during that adversity. Welcome to the show, Captain Charlie Plumb. And first, before I get started there, Captain, thank you for your service and for all you've done. It's because of you and others like you that I and millions of people are able to enjoy a lifestyle that we can. And want to thank you for that.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that. I'm flattered to be on your show.
So, and before we get going, he is a author, and here's a picture of his book, I'm No Hero by Charlie Plumb. So go out and get you one. I'm going to continue running that on the bottom of the show there for anybody to wants to go get his book. And also, I've learned to come to enjoy this quote. Adversity is a terrible thing to waste, by Captain Charlie Plumb. Now, adversity is a terrible thing to waste. You know, we all run from adversity. We hide from it. We don't want it. We want as little to do with it as possible. But I think you're going to find out today that it can only make you grow to be stronger and make you understand how strong a capability you really are. Captain Charlie Plumb, let me ask you a question here when we get started here. What is the numbers 2,103? What did they mean to you?
Those were the days that I spent in that prison camp. I counted every one of them until I finally came home.
Wow. And so actually, that could be a 2,103. That could be part of your lottery number, because that was your ticket to finally come home and start your life again.
That's a great idea. I'm not a big lottery player, but the next time I get a chance, I'll put 2,103. In
there somewhere.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to split the winnings with you.
Oh, there you go. Now I'll be rooting for you for sure. I'll tell you right now, since you're already promising that to me, every time I do a scratch off or something, it always says instant loser. So now that you've already included me in on it, I wouldn't bet on you. All right, Captain Plumb, man, with this coronavirus stuff going on worldwide, the pandemic, everybody seeming to be freaking out on some things. And I understand we got to be cautious with it, but let's talk about the advantage of adversity and how you were able to survive nearly 6 years without Charmin, without toilet paper.
It amazes me. I don't like to talk about this much, but it does amaze me how crazy people get over toilet paper. Having done 2,103 days without Charmin in my life, I can tell you, you can survive without toilet paper.
That's right. That's right. So, I was listening to one of your YouTube videos this morning, and you were talking about how y'all were strapped down, and so strapped down that sores were being made. But the bad thing was you had to lay in your own urine and feces during that time where mice and rats, crawling all over you for all that. So I guess you definitely can go without Charmin.
Yeah, you can. Wasn't much fun, but as I say, and as you have quoted me, adversity is one of those things that that most of us are afraid of, and in fact, you can waste adversity, I'm convinced, by blaming other people for the problems and feeling sorry for yourself, and going into this mode of pity, this pity party that we all get ourselves into. And this fear that we all have in this coronavirus deal is just, it's paralyzing all of us. And you can speak to a little bit about being paralyzed, and you can do it in your body. You can do it, I'm convinced, in your mind. One of the points I make is that you can be in just as much of a prison in your 8-inch cell as I was in that 8-foot by 8-foot cell.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're right. And here's the big thing. You talked about how we can trap our own self. But the big thing to me, I think, is it's easy. It's easy. We're taught to forgive others, but we have a hard time forgiving ourselves when we goof up. We want to sit there and beat and bang ourselves and everything like that. And we want to hang on to what we should have done a long time ago, should have done differently. And if we can forgive others, then we should be able to forgive ourselves as well.
The first several months I was in that prison cell, of course, physically I was ravaged. Every cell in my body seemed to hurt, and I was bleeding from 4 open wounds, no medical care, and getting really weak and really lost a lot of weight. But that was the good news. The bad news was my mental state, because I couldn't forgive myself. And I thought to myself, how could I possibly have failed so miserably in my mission? How could I have possibly given up to the enemy? And that bothered me for quite a while. Finally, I got communication and kind of a secret code that we were using, and tapping on walls and tugging on wires. And I got this information from the guy next door who said, hey, we're not on the defensive here. You've got to believe in yourself. You have to forgive yourself. You have to really think that you can overcome this and even be better off because of the adversity that you're facing. And so that made a big difference, in my life at that time, turning the whole thing around from blame to forgiveness.
Yeah. And what you were saying, oh shoot, I forgot what, shoot. I wanted to get into, and we'll get to it here is a little later, but I definitely want to get into the communication with you wiring your back and forth. It's just amazing how y'all came up with that from there. So,
well, it was, and we of course we couldn't talk to anyone outside our cell. Now, I was in solitary confinement only for a few months. Some guys were in solitary for 4.5 years. But even if you were alone in that cell, if you could communicate with someone else, you had that support group, and it was just vital that we, that we talk to somebody else, that we share our feelings. And I think it's the same thing in the adversity that we're facing now as a nation, as a world. We have to stick together. We have to communicate with each other. We have to, to believe that that we can get through this adversity.
Work as a team. So that's I agree with. So let's go ahead and back up a little bit here, and if you don't mind, let's talk about how you flying your plane, doing your mission, and then when you got shot down with a surface-to-air missile.
Right.
And if you can go ahead and talk, tell us about that
Sure.
and that event.
Sure. I was flying an F-4B Phantom jet. That was the hottest airplane in the world. It goes about 1,400 miles an hour. I was 24 years old in command of this airplane. And it was a highlight of my life, just being able, I felt like I was just a tenth of 1% of all the people in the world could even do that kind of thing. And I felt very proud of what I was doing. I flew 74 combat missions, as you mentioned, and was 5 days from the end of my tour in Vietnam, 5 days from leaving the line and going home to my wife and my friends back here. My co-pilot, guy in my back seat, and I were on a target just south of Hanoi, the capital city. We were hit by a surface-to-air missile. It exploded to some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel we had on that airplane. Sent that bird topsy-turvy, end over end, down towards the rice paddy below. So I ejected from the airplane, which is quite a jolt in itself, and he ejected from the airplane. Our parachutes opened, and in 90 seconds, I went from this king of the sky, Top Gun, indestructible, bulletproof fighter pilot to scum of the earth as a prisoner of war. I hit the ground, sunk about waist deep in a rice paddy. I was descended upon by, it seemed like, 1 million of the enemy, and they stripped me of everything I had, took my flight gear, clothing, personal possessions. They even took my name, and they gave me a name from their language just to humiliate me for the next nearly 6 years. Dragged me around village to village, camp to camp. I didn't see my co-pilot for another 2 years. And I knew he was alive when he hit the ground, but I didn't know what they had done to him. It was a fairly short ride. I was very fortunate in that respect, is that it only took a matter of maybe an hour to get to the prison camp. The guys that were shot down farther south or in the jungle or even in Laos or Cambodia and were dragged for months to get to the prison camp, a lot of those guys didn't make it. So I was one of the lucky ones that got to that prison camp, and at least I was safe from all the enemy attacks and all that stuff. So it worked, and so there I was in a prison camp, tortured for 2 days with military information, political propaganda, and then tossed into this little tiny cell that was going to be my life for a long time.
And I'm sure they tell you as you're training and stuff this possibility of becoming a POW, but what they tell you, and I'm assuming what they train you for, is not exactly what comes out of it. I'm sure it's a lot more involved in that. So what you could imagine, I'm sure.
That's very perceptive of you, James. And it's like any tragedy that we go through in life. You just can't prepare yourself for this. I went through 4 different survival schools. They're called SERE: Survival, Escape, Resistance, and Evasion. And I went through 4 of those schools to teach me to be a prisoner of war. And basically, they were pretty much worthless. The stuff that you use, as you know as well as I do, and that I think that our country is learning now, the stuff that you use in order to overcome adversity and really emerge from these trials with more of a degree of self-confidence is the stuff that you learned in the sandbox, in grade school. The very basics of life, the stuff in the 10 Commandments. It's again the forgiveness issue. It's the very basic things. The survival schools that I went through taught me to eat snails and capture rabbits and make water out of hanging vines and stuff like that. But the real survival, again, it's all in your mind.
Yes, and that's in any adversity, I would think. It goes back to if you think you can't do it, or if you think you can do it, you're right.
You're right. Yep, that's right.
So yeah. So and even if you think you can do it, you give it the best shot you can do and everything, and see how things work out. You may not get it perfect the first time, but you have plenty of times to keep trying, and it teaches you if something's more, if it's important for you to want to do it or not, or if it's achievable or not.
That's a very good point. Is that there's no magic pill to all of this, and to try to tell someone when they're going through trying times that there's light at the end of the tunnel, or that you're going to be better off because of this experience or that stuff, that they think that's heresy. They don't believe that, and it's tough to convince somebody. But your point is, it may not work at first, but you can't stop trying. You just keep banging your head against the wall until something good happens.
Till something finally breaks, right?
Yep.
Neither your mental attitude does shifts and breaks, or you finally break through the wall, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'm all into the power of positive thinking and do the best that you can. Again, we're miserable enough without the help of anything else, whether POW, me being paralyzed, cancer, whatever. We're miserable enough, but we can only make things better or worse for ourselves just by the mental attitude of it.
It's the old adage, it's not what's around you that makes the difference in your life. It's the way you respond to what's around you.
Exactly, the way you respond. So,
and we all have choices, and I think that's the thing that we forget in times of fear, in times of challenge, is that we forget that we have any choice. And back to this virus that's affecting the world, is that's our biggest fear, is that we can't control our destiny. Well, we can control our destiny. There's a lot of things we can do. And if we do these things right, may not work at first, but eventually we'll come out ahead.
Here's the one thing. I was talking with a friend last night. Actually, she's on with us right now. Jan, she's been responding to us. But we were talking last night that, God gives us ways and tests us to help us try to straighten out, to do things right. And there's going to be people that's going to jump on board full speed ahead. There's some that's going to jump on board, and then they're going to say, nope, I'm done with this, and get right back off and go back to doing what they want to. And there's nothing, like I said, we have choices. So,
yep, that's for sure.
So, hey, brother Phil, coming in and say hello.
Hello, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. So,
no, Phil, a long time.
I'm really interested in this. If you can go in some detail with this about the communication. I mean, I know you're in solitary confinement, not even supposed to even whisper to yourself. I would imagine that they think something's going on, and
right.
So explain this great communication system that y'all developed.
I was in that cell. And all alone and very depressed and ready to give up. And a little wire came through a rat hole in the base and corner of that cell. I didn't pay any attention at first, and it sort of scratched and sounded like a cricket. Thought it was a cricket at first. I finally decided I better tug on the wire, and I tugged, and it disappeared. But it came back about an hour later with a note wrapped around the end of the wire. The note was around. It's about 3 or 4 inches long, written on a piece of toilet paper. And so it said, memorize this code. The code was a 5x5 box of the alphabet, 5 letters across and 5 letters down. A, B, C, D, E, then F, G, H, I, J. We left out K to make it come out even. And the numbers down the side and across the top, indicating any letter of the alphabet, would be represented by 2 different numbers, the number of the line, then the number of the row. And so A would be 1, 1, and Z was 5, 5, and a very cumbersome code, as you might suspect, but it worked. And that was what we called the tap code, because we could use it tapping on a wall, and the guy on the other side with his ear to the wall could hear the taps. But we also used it, like this first guy did, Bob Shoemaker, passing a wire. He actually passed that wire across a storeroom. There was a storeroom between our 2 prison cells. So he fished that wire over the boxes and around the shovels and through the ropes and finally into the little hole in my cell wall, 14 feet away over all this junk in the storeroom, just to get to me. And so we started communicating, and I found that code, that tap code, we used in a lot of different ways. We would, for instance, if a guy was able to get out outside the cell, we wanted to get outside, but they wouldn't let us. Very, very rarely, unless they had some work to do. If a guy got outside and was chopping wood, he would chop in this code: chop, 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 chop. And it was like a radio station. It was going throughout the entire camp. He would transmit that, for all of us to hear. So this code just became vital. It was life-saving. It was absolutely life or death that we communicate with other people, to the point that if a guy was put in the far corner of the prison camp and couldn't communicate with the rest of us, he probably wasn't going to make it. It was just that important. And the important part of that, and I think why it really applies to today's world, was it wasn't the words, it wasn't the sentences or the meaning, that it wasn't the data that we were passing around. The life-saving property of communication in a prison cell, and I think in American life, is just the simple validation of another human being. Because in those prison cells, when it was dark, and it was in a lot of the camps, we had no lights, and the camps were in the mountains where you might have 4 or 5 hours of light a day, and the rest of the time it was just pitch dark. And if you were alone in solitary confinement, those two things, if it was dark and you were alone, you'd lose track. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know what was a real memory or a hallucination of a memory. You needed a baseline. Sometimes you even wondered if you were alive or dead, with a simple tugging on a wire. And to have somebody tug back on that wire, but number one, somebody's responding to something I am doing physically. Thus, I exist. I am alive. Number two, somebody cares. So I think in this day and age, when we have those fears, when we face that adversity, it's vital that we validate each other. That we communicate with each other, that we respond, and we care about everybody in our circle.
In every, I would think, and I don't want to jump in, but I would imagine that most or all human beings want that type of caring, knowing that I'm not doing this alone.
Yep.
There's other people out there as a support system, and then this communication y'all developed was a great way to show we're still supporting each other.
Absolutely, and I think it is vital. This is proven. I think with babies, the babies that are nurtured develop, and the babies that are left alone don't. It's fairly common psychology that we need other people. That's who we are.
Yes. Now, I'm just surprised at hearing this part of the story that your enemy didn't pick up with the chopping wood. I mean, I can understand the tugging on the string they couldn't pick up, but the chopping of the wood or the tapping on the walls, it's amazing they couldn't figure out what's going on.
We were surprised that they were so unsophisticated. Now, they weren't stupid by any means. In fact, they had a natural sense, almost an animalistic ability that was far greater than ours. But they didn't grow up riding bicycles and tossing footballs. So they didn't grow up like we did, and they just didn't. They didn't pick up on these kinds of things, and they would come up with just crazy things. And so we found that. Well, one of the codes, you like this, one of the codes we devised when we found out that we couldn't whisper a word inside or outside ourselves, but we could cough and sneeze and spit and wheeze all day long. Most of them had tuberculosis, and so they kind of assumed that we did too. So we developed a code by designating various letters of the alphabet or abbreviations to be represented by coughs, sneezes, spits, or wheezes. So you wake up in the morning, hear the guys in the cell next door go, That means good morning. How are you?
There you go. And of course, obviously, you would think that they were going, y'all are just sick. There's
Yep.
nothing wrong.
Yep.
So they didn't think of communication. They're just
Yep.
going, they're sick. Hey, let's go about our own business.
Yep.
So on that one, yeah.
Same thing with chopping wood. They didn't seem to figure out that there was a certain rhythm and a certain pattern to our chopping of the wood. And so it was kind of amazing how childish they were in nature, and how lack of sensitivity they had to our communication techniques. But we just had some phenomenal. I mean, by the end of my time there, they moved us around quite a bit. I wasn't always in an 8-foot by 8-foot cell. And by the end of my time there, they'd move us to a new camp. And within hours, we would know the name, rank, and service number of every other POW in that camp. Just because we had so many sophisticated ways to communicate. They built a special camp for us that had double walls so that we couldn't hear a tap from the other wall, and it had some vent holes. We never had windows in our prison cells, but it had some vent holes that were 8 or 10 feet off of the floor, of the dirt floor, and the vent holes were maybe a foot high and 6 inches wide, and no vent hole looked into any other cell block, any other building. That it was designed so that we couldn't see anybody else, even if we could get up to the vent hole, which of course we did. Well, to counter that, we made mirrors. If you take a piece of wood, and the wood over there, they had a lot of mahogany, and so we would put earwax on the wood and make a mirror out of this smoothed down piece of wood. And you could hold the mirror out of your vent hole and reflect into another guy was holding the mirror out of his vent hole, and then you could do this Morse code or the tap code with the mirrors, or even sign language. We didn't know the deaf mute code, but we devised a hand code that did the same thing, where A was this, and a B looked like that, and a C and a D, and through the alphabet. And so, in fact, A in one of the codes was like this, and an H was like this. And so when somebody would tell a joke, you went, ha, 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 ha.
There you go. There you go. So it's to me, it's amazing that all you've been through. Of course, we're talking, what, 60 years ago now, 50 years, 55?
47. We
47,
came back.
okay,
Came back
years ago.
okay.
And see, I actually, when I had my injury, I was blessed enough that I met a man named Fred Weber. And the day that he left the hospital, he wrote me this 4-page letter. And
Wow.
I've had it ever since 1983.
Wow.
He was in World War II. And he was not a prisoner of war, but people were drowning as they were trying to get on Omaha Beach.
Mm-hmm.
People getting shot down. And he said he was one of the lucky ones to get to shore. Right. But then he went on, and here's what I'm getting to. It's amazing what you went through, and what all your other prisoner of war, your other friends and camaraderies went through that. And like Fred said here, Fred Weber said, he said that his mind wasn't infested as the bad thing. And that goes back to, again, your mental state. That you, like I said, you could be in that 8-inch prison cell in your mind, but not to let it get infested.
That's a very good word, and I think we do let our mind get infested with negative thoughts and fears that are not very realistic. So yeah, I'll have to remember that, an infested mind.
So yep, I got that from Fred Weber.
Good.
In his letter. So he passed away years ago, but I was blessed to have met him through my journey as well. Now, we know in most cases, no matter what you're doing, working, whatnot, going through school, you've got to play the game to be able to come out on top. I'm sure there was a lot of game playing that y'all had to do, or there was going to be some consequences.
Very true. When first of all, when you are that controlled by the enemy, I mean, they control every minute of your day, and everything that you eat and you see and you hear. All your senses are controlled, and it is a game, and they expect you to respond in certain ways. And so you sort of, as a prisoner of war, you sort of walk this fine line, of trying to convince them that you're following their rules, and then, oh, by the way, doing things the way they should be done, and doing things your own way. And so, it was a lot of secrecy that went on. And the organization that we put together in that prison camp, which I think again is the reason why we thrived through the experience, and not just survived, but the organization and the leadership that we had during those times gave us methods where we could play their game, and then at the same time play our game. I was a very junior officer. I was 24 years old when I was shot down, lieutenant junior grade. And so everybody in the prison camp was senior to me, which was good, actually, because it didn't give me a lot of responsibility. But I watched the leadership, and it was just amazing how that leadership turned things around. So, and the leaders would go to bat for us, just every step of the way. John McCain was my flight instructor in Meridian, Mississippi, and so he taught me to fly jets. John was shot down just 5 months after I was, and so I was first to communicate with John, and found that just what a tough guy he was. He would take torture before anybody else would, and the other senior guys would too. And so they established this feeling that we weren't on the defensive, that we were on the offensive, that we were warriors, and that we would go to our last breath fighting the enemy in this war. And so while we played the game of the enemy, and then secretly we were fighting all the way, not just to survive, but to even thrive through this.
Yeah. And here we got a question from Jan. She wants to know, do you still keep in touch with your other prisoners, other people?
We sure do, Jan. As a matter of fact, those guys are as close as my own brothers to me. When you go through an experience like that, and some of those guys saved my life, and they tell me that I saved theirs. Under that much pressure for that much time, there's just a unity involved. So yes, we have reunions every other year. We have a big POW reunion. We all get together and talk about the good old days.
Yeah, well, the good old days. That's right.
And then if you're in a hotel room at a reunion site and you hear the guys next door, and they'll be tapping on the wall of the hotel, in a secret code that we all can never forget,
Yeah.
that it drives our wives crazy.
And do y'all when y'all meet, do you bring up how your enemy treated y'all? Do you talk about? I mean, do you talk and ask what's happening with Rat? Was his name Rat?
Yeah, the Rat. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rat. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think to a man, we've all forgiven the Rat. Again, the value of forgiveness. And in fact, I went back to Vietnam 5 years ago with my family and visited the Rat. And so it was kind of interesting because the professor at the University of Hanoi, the guy who was in charge of history at that university, wanted me to come and meet the Rat, the guy who was in charge of all of our torture. And I thought, since the Rat at the time was in his 80s, I thought maybe he wanted to apologize, to kind of get it off his chest, all of the torture and the bad treatment. Well, nothing could have been farther from the truth. He didn't want to apologize. And in fact, it was really a bit weird, because the first thing he wanted to do was to hug me. Well, I went to his house and he wanted to hug me, and and that was all right. And I thought, well, where does it go from here? And he said his first words, He said, I was your warden from 1968 to 1972, he said, for 4 years. He said, and my proudest achievement was keeping you healthy and happy while you were here.
Yeah, there you go, and happy.
Yeah, I'm saying, wait a minute, Bubba, don't you remember? Don't you? So,
Yeah.
but when we get together in our reunions, we talk. But we talk about the fun things too. We talk about the humor that we passed around. We talk about the things that we did for each other in times of trial, and in our conversation as as ex-prisoners of war, we really don't get into the blood and guts part of it. We keep it pretty positive because we've all done really well. 591 of us came home. 591, not a big number compared to the length of that war. And of the five, they thought we'd be in baskets. They thought we'd be vegetables. They had our families prepared to institutionalize us. They're going to put us in a funny farm because they thought we were being vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
They would be. I mean, what can you expect if a guy goes through something like that for that long? It couldn't possibly be normal. So from 591 men, we produced 17 generals and 7 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We went back, as I did, to flying airplanes for the military and commanding ships and fleets all over the world. We have doctors and lawyers and preachers and teachers and bishops and judges and mayors. We have a governor from our number, 2 United States senators, a vice presidential candidate, and a presidential candidate from 591 men. And so we've proven, I believe, that adversity is a terrible thing to waste.
To waste. I've seen your quote, and I'm agreeing with you now. I mean, because we've all been through something. We're all going to continue to go through something. It's sad that some people go into more than others.
Yep.
But again, in the long run, it does show you how strong you are. Because I've had people come up to me and say, "I couldn't do what you're doing." I go, "You don't know because you're not in my situation."
That's right.
You'll find out how strong you really are.
Yep. Yeah, I have that same response also. People, tell me, "Oh, I hear your story. I listened to your speech, but oh, by the way, there's no way I could ever have done that." And I said, "Well, you really don't know. We all have that inner strength. I think that you don't know until it's called upon. It's like a match. You don't know if it's going to strike, unless you strike it." So.
That's right. So I wanted to mention, you were talking about how, I guess it was the so-called professionals, therapists and stuff, talking about putting you away because there's no way you'll come back less than infested in your mind. And I mean, not that I'm comparing me or you, apple and oranges, but when I first got hurt, I was told to be put in a nursing home. I'd never get any better at the age of 19 because I got paralyzed. And he said it'd be too much to care for people to care for me.
Yep.
Wow. I mean, that was nothing compared to what you're doing. And here's a professional ready to throw me away.
Yep. Yep.
So,
no,
these people would know better than everybody else.
Well, and they try to write our script. They try to tell us how we're supposed to act, and again, the sort of taking away that choice from us. But no, I totally respect you and what you've been through, and I guess I can say I'm not sure I could have done what you've done. You've come through that and made a great success of yourself. And so, but I think you and I both prove that it's all within us, and your listeners and the people that are watching this may never. I hope and pray they never are paralyzed and are never prisoners of war, but they can have challenges that to them will be just as big. I'm convinced that diagnosis of a cancer or losing a child or losing a job, or even contracting this coronavirus, it can seem like the end of the world, as it seemed to you and as it seemed to me and as the people told us that it was. And so, but I think the good news that you share is that, hey, we all have the capability of making it through these challenging parts of our lives.
Well, it's in our DNA to survive.
Yep.
And we have to do that some way, somehow. So
that's right.
Let's finish up. We're getting ready to finish up here, but let's finish up. What was life like when you first got home?
I came home to another challenge in life. I'd married my high school sweetheart, lovely blonde girl from Kansas, when I graduated from the Naval Academy, and we had spent 4 years of our life together. And then I went off to war, and so she hung on for 5 more years, and then filed for divorce just 3 months before I came home. And I did not know any of this, of course. And so I came home to that sad news because I had spent hours and hours and hours thinking about what it would be like to be back with her, and I planned the rest of our lives together, and so all of that was pretty well shattered. And I remember being in the hospital bed at a Navy hospital near Chicago, and curled up in a fetal position, feeling sorry for myself, and got into that negative thought process. And what did Mr. Weber call it? The type of thing.
Being infested.
Infested. Yeah, I was infested. I got to remember that. I was infested with that kind of negative thinking. And then I kind of came to my senses. Wait a minute. You've just survived nearly 6 years of a somewhat challenging experience. This shouldn't challenge you.
Yeah.
You should be able to pull up your bootstraps and make it through something like this. And so I did. I stayed in the Navy, went flying airplanes, started on a speaking circuit, wrote a book. It's in its 33rd printing now, as a matter of fact. So I've told my story all over the world. And so it's really been a great benefit. She married the guy she was engaged to, and they're living happily ever after. And I remarried a wonderful gal, and we have 4 kids and 4 grandkids. So, life is good if you make it good, and it's your choice to do that. But the world had certainly changed when I came back. I actually was 7 years total, nearly 7 years that I was away from home, and everything changed during that period of time. And so I came back I had to learn to play a new game,
Yes.
And of course, then, not being married, being divorced was a new game. And then getting, onto the speaking circuit and writing a book and continuing my Navy career was all a new game. So, but you learn to play these things, and you learn that through any challenge, there's opportunity.
There is. And sometimes I sit there and tell, and it may not be true for everything, but I think for me, when I got paralyzed, that time was a tragedy, and for everybody it is. But I think overall it ended up being a blessing for me, because I knew where I was heading, and it wasn't in the right direction in a lot of things. And
Yep.
for it to happen to me and the way things turned out for me, there's only one thing I regret. It's not that the pain and suffering that came along with it, the regret, but the one thing I do regret is my family lived all of it with me.
Yeah.
I wish they didn't have to suffer along with me. Other than that, I mean, I can't. I got to say, my life turned out a lot better than I probably would have expected early on. So
I can say the same thing. As a matter of fact, I don't know where I'd be today if I hadn't been shot down. And so, but you're right. My poor mother, prayed for me several times a day for 2,103 days. And when I left, she had a full head of brunette hair. And when I came back, her hair was totally gray. And I apologized to her, I think, every week for the rest of her life. I apologize for having put her in that situation, because when I joined the Navy at age 17, I really had no interest in how it might affect my family. And I'm sure the same thing with playing football. You don't think about these things. You're a kid. And but when I would apologize, my mom would say, "No, don't apologize." She would say, "I would never ever have tried to change your mind and join in the Navy." She said, "I knew the risks involved. Maybe I knew the risks more than you do, but there's no way that I would keep you from trying to serve your country. So, you know, I mean, my mother was absolutely a saint, and the forgiveness that we talk about, I really learned from her. My mother, in all the years that I knew my mother, I don't think I ever knew her to say a bad word about anybody. She forgave everybody for everything. So it's forgiveness was certainly a certain part, a vital part of my survival.
Well, and I want to again appreciate you for being here and giving us a great interview today. And I want to encourage anyone to go to Captain Plumb's YouTube channel. There's two speeches that really stood out to me as I was been viewing these for the last couple of days. One of them and it's part of what he just mentioned about his mother, is called "Who Packs Your Parachute," and that is tremendous to listen to. But also there was another TED Talk that I really loved, and it's How to Escape from Prison. And he compares the 8-foot prison cell he was in to your 8-inch prison mental cell. And those two are phenomenal. And the others, I'm sure, are just as good. Captain Plumb, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service again. You're allowing me to be able to do something like this because you and other people like you allows me to be able to do this.
Thank you, James, and I appreciate your work and carrying the flag. You're absolutely a professor of perseverance, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And everybody else, hey, be sure to subscribe, like, share, get it out to everybody. This is a great topic and everything for the people coming in later to re-listen, review, and everything. Thank you for coming in. Everybody else, Phil, thank you for coming in. Jan coming in. Thank you for all day for coming in. So appreciate all of you for watching and asking and listening. Hey, do something today, tomorrow, something next week that's going to help you persevere past your paralysis.